TiiQu, we aim to inspire trust through providing individuals with the tools needed to test and prove who they are in real time. Roy Leach, Director of Business Navigators, a strategic consultant and advice company, talks about how he got started in the sustainability and energy space.
So up to 20 years ago, when I, along with my partner, formed Business Navigators Limited, and we specialise in management consultancy, particularly in the energy sector and the renewable sector, but also in management and leadership development and training. So that's a little bit about me.
So Business Navigators, where did you get the idea from? How did it start?
We had always wanted to run our own business, and we got the opportunity to do so. So we kind of leapt in at the deep end, but it was really to do with two things. We felt that we could help people really. At that time, we probably had over 30 years experience of leadership and management, and we felt we could really help young people and current managers, etc., to really develop based on our experience and learning. And also we felt from the management consultancy point of view that we could also benefit business as well and help businesses, particularly in our specialism in the energy sector. And then not long after that, really, we became very interested in sustainability and obviously in climate change and the environment, etc., which we had been involved in our previous roles, but it became more and more increasingly more important.
So why do you think it's important for businesses to become more sustainable?
Well, in a nutshell, I think if they don't, they simply won't survive. It's as simple as that. Not only will they not grow, they won't survive. And I think, if you look at any of the big energy companies, Shell or BP or any of the big energy companies, you'll notice that their strategies are already shifting, and they're setting targets for 2040, 2050. These are people who, make a living from carbon fossil fuels, really, and their thinking is shifting massively and has been shifting for 4 or 5 years now to what are their companies going to look like in 30 years' time. And it's going to be green energy sources, more and more increasingly moving towards green energy sources and less towards carbon-based energy sources. So if you look at those types of companies as an extreme, if those companies who are making their living effectively from supplying fossil fuel are seeing that and are changing, then it's obvious that if other companies don't do that, then clearly they're going to struggle. I would also say that those companies are huge employers in their own rights, but they also have huge supply chains. And obviously, it won't be just to do with how those companies change, but if you are a supplier to those customers, if you don't change as a supplier, then they probably won't use you anymore, because obviously you'll adversely affect their carbon footprint. So I think major companies will drive a lot of this progress, really. So that's the main reason. I think it's as simple as that, Laura. If you don't become a sustainable business, you won't survive. If you do, conversely though, if you do become a sustainable business, I think you've got a real opportunity then to grow and outcompete with other businesses. And I think that applies whether you are in a business that's a profit-making business or a not-for-profit business. I think it applies the same way. And obviously, increasingly, if you look at the public sector side of that, increasingly those public sector organizations will also necessarily need to change and become sustainable. So I think it's both sides of the equation, if you like, both the private and public sector. So a long answer, Laura.
Do you think there's specific things that businesses should be doing or could be doing in order to work towards becoming more sustainable?
Indeed, yeah. I think it's a completely holistic approach. I think if businesses try to look at one aspect, then they will, for my money anyway, they will fail to deliver it. If for example, they just focus on environmental. So let's say they undertake some small scale environmental improvements, then of course that's positive, and of course that will make a difference. But if, for example, let's say that then cost the business and then the business started to not make profits or make return for shareholders, etc., then just looking solely on the environmental side of it is simply not enough, because clearly you can't just be sustainable, but then not meet the needs of your shareholders, meet the needs of your stakeholders. So then you move into the kind of economic side. So you've got environmental, which is sometimes abbreviated to planet. You've got the economic aspects, which is sometimes abbreviated to profit. If you then look outside of those businesses, if you look societally, I believe that increasingly people in the world and in the UK are becoming more and more pro-sustainable. So, if you can't demonstrate to the societies where you employ people, you probably won't attract people. If you don't supply products that to those societies that are demonstrably sustainable and meet what society requires, or alternatively, if you do things that impact on the local health of the local people in that society, then clearly you're going to be in a situation where again you're not going to be able to continue in business. So that's the kind of societal side, which sometimes abbreviated to people. The fourth aspect for me, Laura, of this is one of governance. I didn't mention before, I'm actually an accountant, and so if you look at the accountancy profession and you look at things like any company or any individual trader has got to produce accounts. Well, increasingly there is more and more emphasis on producing those financial accounts for you to be demonstrably a responsible business and for you to be demonstrably a sustainable business. And that's just beginning to change. It's just beginning to come along. But I feel in 5, 10, 15 years time, if you haven't got that governance side of things, sometimes called abbreviated to the process in place, then again, you don't do it. So that's the fourth track, the people who want to work for you, what you would like to work for you. So again, I think that's at the heart of it. And I think that's very much the challenge that all governments have got across the world, but in particular in the UK, whether it's the Westminster government or the devolved governments. I think they've really got a challenge in winning the hearts and minds of the people, really. And so it's those 5 aspects for me. It's environmental, it's economic, it's societal, it's governance, and it's culture. So those are the 5 things that we look at holistically in terms of being a sustainable business, not just, are we reducing our carbon footprint, because that doesn't quite hack it.
So do you think those businesses that don't employ those, do you think they won't maybe last for the next 50 years? They might disappear?
I don't think so at all. If you look on the stock exchange of the top FTSE 100 companies over the last 15 to 20 years, you'll see that the top 100 now, in a majority of cases, are very different than they were 20 years ago. Now, that's for a variety of reasons, but times change and the mood of the people changes, and therefore, I think what you will see in 20 years' time in the top FTSE 100 and in other companies as well that are not even floated on the stock exchange, I think you will see more and more sustainable companies. I mean, one of the largest companies that you will have read about, multi-trillion dollar company, is obviously now Tesla. So there's one example for you, Laura, of predominantly electric vehicles, but perhaps lesser known, but increasingly more important, to do with storing of electricity and batteries, and that, by the way, is a fundamental critical success feature of the future, that we can store electricity. So obviously Musk identified that, and I was just reading a few days ago that they are now a $1 trillion company and one of the largest companies in the world. So I think, again, that obviously a really big organization, but I think that's a good example of what I'm saying, really.
Yeah. So do you think there's any currently on the globe, do you think there's any damage that's currently irreversible in terms of the climate?
That's a very good question. It's not one I've really considered. I think there probably are signs that there are areas that are approaching that level. Holes in the ozone, perhaps, that over major countries such as India, China, even parts of the UK, that probably are irreparable. If you look at some of the pollution in some of the rivers and streams and oceans in some parts of the world, it might not be irreversible, but it would take a significant effort, worldwide effort, and probably billions of dollars of investment to actually reverse that. And I can't see that the polluters who polluted that, who may not even be around anymore, are going to foot that bill. So I would always think, well, who's going to kind of pay for that? So I think there probably, it's more of a scientific question than I could answer, but I think there are probably some areas which are irreversible, Laura. I think there probably are some aspects that are, and so I've just quoted one or two there.
Just one final question. What would you say that a business can do, like a small thing every day, to make themselves more sustainable?
I think the first thing that they've got to do is they have got to grasp what I mentioned before about the holistic approach, about looking at the 5 aspects of how they are going to go in the future, and look at not so much their vision, because I'm not particularly big on vision statements, but I think they have seriously got to step back and say, what is our purpose? What is our role? How do we become a sustainable business? And I think you need the CEO or the leader of, if it's not a profit-making business, and the senior leadership team or the senior management team. I think first and foremost, they have got to sign on to it, because if that doesn't happen, I don't believe you get the leadership. I think then what they probably need is a rolling plan, really. These things are not going to happen overnight. They probably need a rolling, dependent upon the business. You know, somebody as big as BP might need a rolling 30-year plan. Other businesses might only need a rolling 30-day plan. But I think that they need to then think about, you know, what measures can we take over that period. So if you take a smaller business, they've probably not got to do many things, and they've got a 30-day rolling plan, then they could do one of those things each day to answer your question, whatever is in the particular plan that's relevant to the business. And then if they did each one of those each day, I'm a firm believer in having an overarching objective and then breaking that down into smaller goals. If you look at some of the most successful businesses in the world, if you look at some of the most successful sports teams in the world, if you look at some of the most successful individuals in the world, that many of them will tell you that they set an overall objective to achieve. They break that down into smaller manageable chunks, and then they deliver those smaller goals along the journey. But I think you also need to kind of win the hearts and minds as well of your organization. So there's no, you know, I've seen it happen in other areas over many decades, Laura. For example, health and safety 20, 30 years ago, people used to pay lip service to it a little bit. So it was kind of an add-on to a business. Now you'll find very few businesses where it isn't embedded in their DNA, because it can't not be, because they don't want to see people hurt, they don't want to see people injured, it costs them too much, it's against the law, and all those good reasons. So I think that, you know, to answer your question, I think that you really need to break it down business by business and say, what are those simple steps that you can change each day? But obviously, to extend that answer, I would probably begin by looking at the current carbon footprint. So say, you know, what is the carbon footprint of my business? And then looking at that and saying, there's usually 2 aspects to that. There's the demand aspect. So in other words, what is my business demanding? So clearly, if you're something like a steelworks, you're going to be using natural gas, methane, to fire your furnaces and produce your gas, for example. So that will be a massive demand on a steelworks. But if you then look at, well, without that demand, they haven't got a business. So you can't say, well, we'll just switch off that furnace, because if you switch off that furnace, you won't be able to switch it back on again, basically. It's 24/7, 365 production. So they can't, those types of businesses, you know, they can switch the lights off in their offices, they can, you know, give their employees electric vehicles and such like that. But it's only going to scratch the surface, really, because the focus is obviously on a huge demand by the very nature of the business. And you could say, okay, well, maybe I know there are conversations around maybe we use too much steel and what have you, but at the end of the day, we are still going to need steel in the future. So then if you look at the supply side of the equation, so if you're limited by that, you either go out of business or you've got to have something that will fire your furnaces. You then got to look at the supply side of the equation. So obviously one thing that steelworks, for example, are looking at is things like green hydrogen. Now that, and again, it's another big debate, but essentially green hydrogen is hydrogen produced by green sources. So you would get your electricity, pump the electricity through water hydrolysis, and then you would produce your green hydrogen. So you use maybe wind turbines or you use solar farms, etc., to produce your green energy, pump it through the water. That then creates obviously hydrogen gas and oxygen, breaking down H2O. So that then enables you to have your hydrogen. So I think although there's a big lobby against the green hydrogen solution to sustainability and climate change, I think it does have a place. I think it certainly has a place in those industries that necessarily burn a lot of energy. So steel industries, ceramics industries, glass industries, those types of industries, you know. So I think it's very much dependent upon the nature of the business. Yeah, I talk a lot about energy because my expertise is around the energy sector, really. Well, you know, a business for me can't be sustainable unless it's got a good carbon footprint. But obviously, we look at things like the circular economy. You know, we look at things like supply chains, et cetera, which are all relevant to sustainability. You know, and recycling and all of those things. But I focused a little bit on energy today.
TiiQu is a community of trusted experts who continuously test their skills and knowledge. The TiiQu app allows you to build your portable, irrefutable professional reputation. TiiQu users can assess their skills against the ever-growing traceable knowledge to reach expert level. You can contribute as a co-creator on the TiiQu app and help others grow their skills and knowledge. Find out more on TiiQu.com.